did or do you see a lot of this occult symbolism being blatantly used in a lot of movies and music videos?
Yes.
Do you have
Um,
like certain examples of anything?
well, I mean, it could be something as blatant as you know, Hereditary, that movie that I
Okay.
mentioned earlier.
Hmm.
Um, or sub, there are subliminal things, but like a lot of people have this idea that like, oh, this is coming from the puppet masters are doing this for subversive subliminal influence.
Okay.
When nine times out of ten, it is an edgy Satanist animator or VFX artist or wardrobe or costumer who
Hmm.
puts their own little thing in there for themselves, and for the wink and the nod of their compatriots,
Right.
as opposed to it being like an actual part of some like grand influence campaign. I would be more concerned about the influence campaign of critical theories than actual like Satanism or occultism.
Do you think there is that though, that larger network of evil, other than just like the wink and the nod? Do you like? Cause some people would be like, they'll say, even Wizard of Oz is an early example of the occult bleeding into something major with the witches and all that stuff.
Sure.
And do you think that's still going on today, like to that degree, or is there a lot of these people who just read a passage and they think they call themselves Satanists in Hollywood?
I don't know 100%. Um, it's it's confusing intentionally. Um, Again, I would be less concerned now today with somebody putting a witch in a cartoon as a way to kind of like sell the idea of witchcraft, and
Hmm.
more concerned with the new gods of left progressivism that are way more obvious and way more pernicious.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. It seems
Um,
like they just kept evolving their blatant use of different types of monsters in media, whereas a witch 50, 60 years ago might have been, way more subversive to the mainstream world. Now it's the monsters have mutated into way worse things.
it is, and it's become way more obvious, which I think is indicative of the fact that they think that they're winning, and are able to do it at a more accelerated rate. They don't have to be as subtle.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it is also, I think, more evil because it is predominantly directed towards children.
Mm-hmm.
Again, there is, I think it was Jesus that said something about millstones and harming children. Like it's as evil as you can get. And something that I wrote as a note to you, in going into this, like after I left uh, the kind of like the party scene of the occult practitioners in Hollywood,
Mm-hmm.
um, I was able to get uh, access to some more occult researchers who were Thelemites and Manly P. Hall acolytes, and talking to them. Uh, I thought, because my areas of study were always kind of like the overlap of the material and the immaterial realms in the afterlife. Those are like my focuses, and I was trying to find people that I could bounce research off of with, and all of their focus was on critical theories and was vague neo-Marxism. Uh, and it's not that I'm bitter that occultism was subverted by ideology, um, and that I found like unimpressive, but it made it later obvious to me when I started seeing this neo-Marxism and these critical theories in popular culture that, oh, that is the tactic. That is the occult influence manifest now. It is just manifest under a different message, because it's more difficult to get people on board if you're like, oh, I'm putting in like some a little nods to witches and Satan. But if you can shield that same evil energy under the guise of progressivism,
Right.
then people are a lot more happy to sign on to that. Um, to sign on to that cause. And that's what we're seeing. That's what we're seeing now, and I think that's why it's growing so fast, because they don't even know that they're really serving uh, an occult order basically at this point, and this is not just merely liberal progressivism, and it is not just merely fairness, or being kind or empathy. It's a chaotic and destructive force that I think is being used intentionally to destabilize our society.
I totally agree. I think this is a case of evil subverting other evil to
Hmm.
rebrand itself to do exactly what you're saying. You know, take advantage of these people and have them worship. They don't even realize they're worshiping something far worse. Although the occult stuff is terrible, but this is like and the Marxist stuff is terrible. This is a deep, deep evil that just looks for a new host. You know, every generation it seems like there's evil inhabiting some new institution, and now it seems to be in many institutions all at once.
It's bad, man, and and I don't know, like I don't know in your day to day over on your neck of the woods, like how many of these people you come into contact with that are like full hook, line, and sinker into this ideology. Uh, but I do not step onto a film set or a studio lot without 99.9 of these people being 100% bought in.
Man, well,
And
it's
like
a lot less in West
it's kind of
Virginia,
weird
but
because
they're
like, all
here.
right, I can wrap my head around, and maybe it's just because of my upbringing. When you like living in Texas, and like my family's still in Texas,
Hmm.
talking to old guys, like dudes in their like 60s and 70s that are like hyper conservative, like that squares okay in my mind. Like that makes sense to me for some reason.
Hmm.
But like I go specifically this show that I'm working on right now, and like my bosses who are like in their 60s, they're grown ass men, who are good at their job and who are not stupid people who I respect.
Hmm.
But then you hear them talk like as like a full blown Trump derangement syndrome, like hyper leftist. It's kind of unbecoming. It's like, it's almost like jarring to see. It's a little strange to me. Like
They're
What is your,
possessed.
it doesn't seem right.
but like, what is your experience like when you go to set? Are you nervous? Are you
Mm.
worried? Do you have to pretend that you are, like, you err on the side of their beliefs?
I do sometimes, which I'm not super proud of. I don't say things I don't believe, but I
Hmm.
won't engage in certain conversations. I have been successful turning some people on a one-to-one basis.
Nice.
I have like, 7 notches on my bedpost at this point of people that and I often say like, I can't turn a leftist into a Republican, but I can turn him into an anti-government extremist, and that's at least good enough for me,
Nice.
because that's where I'm at.
Yeah, that's
And
great.
it's not super difficult,
Hmm.
especially working with union people who claim to be like pro working class and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
You approach them from the left, from an anti-war, anti-tax point of view. You don't talk about transgender children or things like that, not off the get-go.
Hmm.
Uh, and I've had some success with that. Talking about
That's great.
taxation and how we should own our own labor, and how much of our issues would be absolved if we just kept all the wages of our labor rather than giving it to the government, which then uses it to bomb children overseas or pay out their special interest buddies.
Nice.
Uh, and so I do have success with that. I try and take it slow. But then if I take you out on a camping trip and get you around a campfire, like you're toast. Like the conversion is complete at that point. That's where I do my best work.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so I do have, but I can spot pretty quickly, if somebody uh, is going to be able to, or if somebody is a lost cause.
Hmm.
And unfortunately, like most of the people, like millennials, my age people, I think there's hope for. But unfortunately, like most of the older guys, like they're completely lost, which is even worse because again, these are people that are supposed to be my superiors, who I have respect for, both like as far as how they operate their trade and just as full fledged thoughtful humans.
Mm.
Um, but they're not. They're not there, and it very much feels like possession. And like I've seen people who are oppressed by demons,
Hmm.
uh, and people who are oppressed by this ideology have 9 out of the 10 same symptoms, basically. The way that you see in their eyes and the way that they froth at the mouth, basically, when they start talking about these kinds of things and get all frenzied. And then the way that if they hear an opinion that they disagree with, they literally will recoil, uh, like a demon being exposed to holy water. It's strange and it's weird, but um, because of that, I've seen this now, or understood this now as more of a spiritual battle rather than just kind of like one where we're discussing politics, a la Gore Vidal and William F. Buckley or something like that. That is long gone at this
Yeah,
point.
it's too bad because I do love those old interviews, but
Yeah, right.
we are far beyond those days. Although there's very useful information in those interviews. I'm in the same boat with it just boils down to good and evil, and my entrance to believing in God was accepting that there's horrible evil in this world, and then I was like, well, if there's evil, there must be the balance, because I see balance in nature, I see balance in life, and then I was like, well, there's got to be, if there's evil, then there's got to be good, and then that just opened me up, and that was that was like I don't know, 2014, 2015.
Hmm.
But sometimes you have to confront evil. And you were saying stuff about demons, and then you even said the word legion earlier. I don't know if you meant it, but in the Bible, the demons are the first to acknowledge Jesus as the Son of God, and it's called legion because there's a legion of demons inhabiting that man,
Hmm.
that Jesus lets he like, what is he brings all the demons out, puts them in pigs, and makes the pigs run off a cliff and they drown.
Mm.
It's quite an image. It makes me think of March of the Pigs with Nine Inch Nails, but that's another story. So you're out there, you're seeing these parties, you've done like all this research, you're seeing there's people out there who are deeply embedded in it, but also people who aren't as researched, but just going along with it and think they're whatever, Luciferians, Satanists. And you're also not partaking in these rituals because you have this voice in your head telling you there's consequences beyond the material world, but beyond the material world. Can't speak.
Hmm.
What then brings you to the point? Is it a system of things, or like a bunch of different experiences that eventually snaps you out of this, or is there one big event?
It's a couple, and actually, the way that you explained it is about um, understanding absolute good or
Mm,
understanding absolute evil or witnessing absolute evil, which necessitates an absolute good. That is extremely common as a testimonial for like a lot of people that leave Satanism and leave the occult.
mm,
And it's very similar to my own as well.
interesting.
The when you get into the Kabbalion or like certain kind of like Hermetic traditions, they believe that all things exist kind of like on a spectrum. Like hot and cold are just two ends of the spectrum of the same thing. And likewise, absolute good and absolute evil are opposite ends of the same thing. But I have witnessed, um, luckily not face to face, but have been confronted with absolute evil, and you do have this kind of like it hits you at one point that if this absolute evil exists, and it does, and it's right here, then an absolute good must exist,
Can you
because everything has its equal opposite.
can you describe that?
Um,
Can you describe that experience?
um, like when I had my own personal reckoning with absolute evil.
Yes.
Uh, yeah, I guess a lot of it had to do with a a long rabbit hole that I went down, um, involving uh, trafficking and the Epstein
Hmm.
era and like all of that kind of stuff. And you read these cases and you read these court documents and you see these videos, and you see interviews with these people, and you see the absolute evil within them.
Hmm.
And it's right that you can't ignore it because it's something that hits most humans on such a visceral level. that you just can't understand. Like we can all kind of like justify and understand performing an act that may not be considered good, that is necessary under a given circumstance. However, when it comes to these kind of like actions, there's no, that doesn't exist. There is no good into it.
Right.
And especially going back to when it comes to uh, the innocence of children and corrupting that, that's about as evil as it can possibly get. Uh, and there's no explanation for it other than it being derived from an absolute evil. And that's, not only does that exist, but it exists too much, far too much.
Yeah, it's
Uh,
widespread.
it's everywhere in an alarming, awful, very disturbing way. Uh, and you can't face that and explain it without some sort of recognition of there being an actual malevolent, evil energy that is doing this. You can kind of see it with people that have psychopathy and these serial killers
Mm-hmm.
that are like, oh, this isn't just your natural coming from a rough upbringing.
Mm-hmm.
There's something evil here.
Way darker.
Exactly, and it's less obvious to see the inversion of that manifest as like absolute good, which is why I think it's easy to stray away from the idea of God or of some sort of redeemer, because that's just less obvious to see.